Good afternoon, everyone. It's a lovely day outside, and what better day to do another episode live, broadcasted to your social media and YouTube channels everywhere. Coffee with Chris. As always, this has been brought to you in association with our charity partner, Big C, who are a local charity that affect people that are affected by cancer. And I'm delighted to be joined by Dan Bradfield, who's the managing director of Naked Marketing. These guys help build brands with design and marketing. Simple as that, right, Dan?
Absolutely, yeah. Well said. Thank you.
You're with us today, Dan. I really wanted you to come on, so I'm so grateful for your time, matey. It frustrates me no end when I run social accounts and I look at social accounts and the branding is all over the show, or dare I say, it's just really poor. And so it's one of those areas, I think, of marketing that can quite often get neglected. People just get busy with all of these activities or technical know-how, but they almost don't have that overarching brand to work with. And so I really wanted you to come on to sort of impart your wisdom. So I've broken down a conversation today into sort of three key areas, Dan: the why, the what, and the how. And so kicking off with the why, because I think many people will say, our brand's fine, we've had the same logo for years, that does the job. So why is brand so important when it comes to social media from your side of things?
Well, you know very well, Chris, that social media is an increasing tool. Increasingly, it's where your customers will engage with your brand and interact with your brand. So you've got to have that. You've got to have that presentation set. You've got to have the bits in place that mean that if somebody's coming to your profile and seeing your social media for the first time, you're creating the right impression. You're not putting them off as somebody lands, and that it's creating the right impression of who you are as a company, who you are as a brand, and ultimately you're trying to get them to stick with you and be interested in what you've got to say. So yeah, there's that first impression.
From what I know of Naked Marketing, Dan, you guys are a real specialist in the world of local businesses. And the thing that frustrates me no end is when local businesses dress themselves up as national businesses, and it kind of can come across as maybe a bit soulless, a bit less kind and friendly, and it just loses that local vibe. And I often find that when you bring it back to the local vibe is actually when we start to see a sales increase for those perhaps smaller to medium businesses. Is that a fair statement to make? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, because it's authentic, isn't it? And I always see social media as a chance to kind of pull back the curtain a little bit. See a little bit more about who is this brand, who are the people within it, and that whole local thing, like you said, is really, really important, because I do think you can dial up or dial down the polishedness of your social media, depending on your brand. But that for a local company, a local brand that works a lot with kind of local people, it's that, especially in the B2B world where you've got that people, that relationship thing is really important. And yeah, I agree. Just that authenticity of just allowing a little bit of behind the scenes and finding out a little bit more about who is this business, who is this brand. It's not just a faceless brand that you never actually get to see or hear of the people behind it. There's always a nice story to tell, and social media is a great chance to do that for a brand.
Absolutely, with you entirely. Let's move on to the what, Dan, because I think so many people will still think that your brand, and don't swear at me because we are live, your brand just counts as your logo, right? And that's not the case. I know that. But I'd really like to understand, almost provide us with a bit of a social media checklist, if you will, Dan. What are the areas of brand on social that businesses should be aware of and should really look into improving?
Well, logo is obviously one of, and it is one of. It's not the only, but it is one of, and it is quite an important one. You know, in the world of social, you know, you've only got a little icon to play with a lot of the time in terms of that's how you're showing up in people's feeds, and that's how you're listed. So you've got to think about that. I think how your branding, how your visual identity works as just a tiny icon, I think is an important consideration. As well as the rest of the visual elements of your profile. You know, it's part of your shop window. You know, you land on someone's profile, you're going to make judgments on the different elements. And the bio is also really important. The very, very short part of the story you tell. You know, it's very difficult to get across who you are and what you do as a brand, what you stand for as a brand in a very succinct, just a few words. And a bio forces you to do that. And that's really important to get that right. It's got to say who you are, and it's got to give a glimpse of, no, it's got to say what you do, and it's got to give a glimpse as to who you are and why you do that. I think is the perfect blend. And that goes beyond the visual side of the branding exercise. That comes into the sort of story of your brand. And brand is storytelling, right? A big part of branding is storytelling. It's how we connect with brands. It's how we remember them. It's how it creates that distinction and that trust. So that's just as important, as well as social media as well. Linked to that, you know, you've got personality and tone of voice. Now sometimes I think that's neglected, because the visual side is very sexy. The visual side is, you know, everyone loves visuals. Tone of voice and personality is also really important, and it needs to work with the visual side of things. So yeah, get the visual elements right, make sure they're fit for purpose, and the story too.
Really good, Dan. Something that is becoming increasingly ever popular from what I can see is brands or businesses are starting to understand that how their brand is translating on social isn't working. And what I mean by that is, I see so often, it's one of the first things that I actually help advise people on when we onboard a new client, is they've got their company logo. There's that word again. They've got their company logo, but it's got all of this writing around the edge, etc. And actually, when you see it on your phone, you can't really see it. It actually just makes the whole thing look naff, because you can't actually really clearly see it. So I'm seeing a trend, Dan, and obviously this is more in your world than mine, so correct me if I'm wrong here, where a lot of businesses are almost subtracting some of that unnecessary text. So, for example, they've got their emblem, their watermark, etc. But it's that copy around the outside, you know, established since, and all of that type of stuff. So that's one thing that I'm noticing. The other thing that I think is gold from you there, Dan, and this is something that bugs me on LinkedIn particularly, you talk about your banners and things like that. So many people don't even use that free advertising space, and I'm like, what are you doing? It's the perfect opportunity to, you know, broadcast your brand effectively. So I actually just wish people used anything there. And I think that would be really good stuff. Absolutely. But I'm keen to hear your thoughts on the logo side of things, Dan, because when I suggest it to some people, you can see them go, oh, they don't like the sound of that because they've had it forever, right? But do you think it's important for brand to, you know, almost have some guidelines in place where like no, this is what we look like on social, and this is what we look like in print, etc.?
Yeah, I think that's really important. And whenever we're working with clients on branding, so that creative phase, if we're ever presenting logos and different elements of a visual identity, we'll always identify, here's an icon. So this is what you might use as a profile image on your social media profiles, and other instances where there's more and more digital instances. Even you know, on your website, the tiny little favicon next to the URL, you know, that's got to be a really simple icon. And we do that whenever we're working on a new brand now, is that icon. And the simpler, the better.
I agree. I wholeheartedly agree. Let's move on to the how, the nuts and bolts of this, Dan. I know that, you know, you and I could talk shop on this for hours and hours, I'm sure, but to try to simplify it, how how does a business go about, building a brand on social media? And there's something that you touched upon at the start of this conversation, Dan, which I thought was superb.
Yeah.
It's finding the right balance between, your super polished stuff and also maybe the other side of the fence is the super authentic stuff. Do you agree with that? Like, is that one part of it? And how would you say, if you were to start, read social media from scratch, for example, how would you effectively build that brand on social media from your side of things?
Well, you would probably answer this question far better than I, Chris. Is building social media presence is your day-to-day job. But from my point of view, authenticity should always be there. So I don't necessarily think you should dial up or dial down the authenticity. I think that should be at a constant high level. As I mentioned earlier, I think polishedness can dial up or dial down. I think it depends on the content, depends on the brand. I think some types of content lend themselves to more authenticity, less polished, and then some types of content lend themselves to being slightly more polished. But regardless, it's always got to be great content. You've got to think about your content. It's the lifeblood of your social media presence. It's got to be shareable, it's got to be on brand, it's got to encourage engagement from the people who follow you. You've got to encourage that interaction, and it's about spreading your message, isn't it? It's about reaching more and more people. So building a brand, I would have a level of consistency. Again, just that recognition and that familiarity with what you're putting out there. But on the same time, be a bit varied. Be consistent but varied. Now, I know that's a contradiction, but as a consistency with your style, but be varied with your content and make it interesting.
I'm totally with you on that, Dan. I think there's so much value to be had out of that. And I think often we see businesses on one side of the fence. They're either so super polished, like everything's got design elements to it. Maybe it's just looking a bit too corporate, dare I say. Or the other side of the fence is there's nothing around design, around brand. They're just kind of throwing things around. And the thing that I still think we're sort of growing out of is there used to, particularly on Instagram, there used to be this whole trend of, for example, having this perfect feed that just sort of flowed and and don't get me wrong, I would say, from your business perspective, Dan, obviously a perfect thing to do, right? Because you want to be showing off what you can do in that area. But for a lot of people, I find that it perhaps slows down that consistency and that execution. So that balance is important to have, right, isn't it?
Yeah, 100% agree. I think I know exactly what you mean with that approach of that perfect flow. And I think it starts off as a lovely idea, but it quite quickly restricts you. And social media has to be that, and you will say this, I'm sure, it has to be that regular. It moves quickly. You need to be regular with it. If you're trying to make every post or everything you put out there perfect in every way, you're not going to meet that regularity. You're not going to have that consistency of your frequency. And yeah, I think there are some things where you can just try and perfect it just a little bit too much, because ultimately it's a really fast moving place, isn't it? Social media. So if a post goes out and it doesn't meet that perfection standard that you strive for, it doesn't really matter, because the next day you've got another post going out and that one might fly.
So with you. Dan, I'd be quite keen now to sort of lift the lid in terms of your world and what you're working on and who you're working with and what's inspiring you. And, particularly in this area, what businesses have effectively built their brands on social media? I mean, certainly locally, like, do you have any perhaps examples or client case studies that you could cite to where you could maybe explain why they look good and why they perform well?
There's a few probably offhand that I could throw in there. I know the first one that comes to mind is unfortunately not a client of ours.
Yet.
Hustle. I don't know if you know Hustle, the fitness kind of
Bobby.
boxing.
I know Bobby. Hello, Bobby.
Bobby, yeah. So Bobby from the off invested heavily in building a brand through social media. Their content is superb, and it's regular, and it's very on brand, and it gives insights about who they are as a brand, what their culture is, what they stand for. And it gripped me. I'm not a member of Hustle. I've been a few times and I will go again. But it made me want to be part of that community, and they did a great job of that.
Do you think, Dan, that my observations of their socials is not only is it so super consistent and authentic and friendly and personable in terms of the copy and what they're doing to engage with them, build their community, great. But from a branding perspective, I just love how bloody simple it is. And I mean that with love and respect. It's just so easy to grasp it. And I find that, again, just from a social media perspective, so many businesses are spending so much time coming up with all of like these fancy pants things that take 6 months to actually sign off. But I just love the fact that Bobby and the team there at Hustle have built that brand from the off. But it seems that it's just been, no, look, this is what we are. Let's keep it simple and let's get it out there. Is that
perfectly with what they're about and what they stand for? Their whole look and feel is perfect for what they're about, and they've been consistent with it. And they use it really well. So yeah, I agree 100%. Really good example.
Did you say you had a few others for me, or a couple more?
Well, the others I have just kind of demonstrating the power of building a brand through social media. I mean, you only have to walk past 𝗖𝗵𝗿𝗶𝗀 on a Saturday morning in Norwich. It's the power of building a brand on social media. I mean, that's amazing how well that brand has done locally. It's very, I mean, everyone loves pictures of food, right? Really, really good food. It's very shareable.
They're not trying to be something they're not, Dan. This is what I wanted to interrupt you with there. They're not trying to be something they're not. And I share this with business I consult with all the time. When it's like a food brand, or we've recently onboarded Warner's estate agents. Effectively, it's just your online portfolio, right? I know that you've obviously worked with Warner's before. They're a client of yours too. Just keep it simple. Share the things that people want to see. It doesn't need to be overthought, does it? And when you combine that with effective brand, it can really propel content. I think 𝗖𝗵𝗿𝗲𝗲 is a good example. I'm not walking past it though, Dan, because I'm already in there. One more for me, my friend. One more.
You've got more patience than I have.
And did you have one more, Dan?
Yeah, one more. So Raw, you obviously know that we've done some work with Raw. So we did a little bit of work with them on kind of their social presence, and really kind of pulling it back to at the core of their brand was this idea of imaginative adventure, right? So that's what they deliver. That's their purpose, and we wanted to represent that through social media. So we kind of dialed down the polished, graphically produced posts and dialed up the user-generated content and the real authentic images of people having imaginative adventure, great days out at Raw. And that's worked really well. Their followers have gone from, and they're not purely down to us, I will admit, but their followers have gone from 8,000 to, I think they're at 12,500 now. And it just shows that authenticity is really well valued. So I think they do a great job on their socials.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. They've done a brilliant job on it. And from a branding perspective, I was one of those guys that just couldn't shake the dinosaur part. I'd call it the dinosaur part forever. But since you've worked with them, honestly, that transition for me is just, it's Raw. Like, we all just call it Raw now. And I think that's with tremendous credit to the team at Naked for supporting them with that plan and that execution around that. So it's brilliant. And you said something there, brilliant. UGC, user generated content. Yes, please. I'm a big fan of this. And that can count as brand too, right? Because you can grab something that a customer, a client has created or sent or shared, but you can still add your own branding elements to those, right? So you can still be quite clever with it and still kind of curtail it within your branding guidelines. Some brilliant examples there, Dan. Maybe to challenge you a little bit and be brave with you, Dan. What are the absolute clangers? What are the big mistakes that businesses are, not your clients, obviously, what are some businesses getting wrong when it comes to their brand on social? What do you scroll on LinkedIn and see and go, oh God?
I think that we've spoken about it already a little bit, is that kind of over polished, seeing it as a selling tool, a place to make a polished advert, and I'm going to publish a well-polished, designed advert that's going to sell what I offer, and that's going to engage my audience. You know, that's not what people want to see on social media. It's, you know, have some fun with it, tell something interesting. You know, don't sell to people. No one wants to be sold to on social media unless it's a paid ad. You expect it. I think that's my number one top mistake. Is don't use it as a hard sell.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, inconsistency, we've covered that a little bit. So inconsistency with your style, your branding, your messaging, your story. I think get that straight, work out what it is you want to say, and stick to that, and keep with it. Hammer that message home. Tell that story of your brand. That's 2, isn't it? What else?
I'll have just 2. If you can't think of a third, I'll have just 2 because
yeah. Why didn't you add a third? What's your third?
My real bugbear is going back to that previous point, Dan, about logos that you cannot read properly on your phone. It absolutely, like, you know, I'm actually half tempted to just for the fun of it one day go through LinkedIn and just send blanket emails to people saying, please change this. It's hurting my feelings. It's just one of those things that a lot of brands need to grow up and grow into now with regards to this social media world that we're living in. And there's plenty of reports and insight out there to say that people are searching more through social first over Google now in some cases. So it highlights the importance even more of making sure that your logo stands out. You know, when someone sees a post from Reeve Social Media, it's RR, and it's as simple as that. You know, it's so easy to just see straight away, clear, punchy, and it must stand out. And I'm sure that you would agree with that from a branding perspective, Dan, that so many brands are getting washed away on social. Is that a statement you would agree with? Or
such a crowded, noisy place, it's really important to have that clear standout. And that's a perfect practical example of where that comes into play.
Dan, it's been a pleasure. As I've said to you before, we can talk and talk and talk and talk. In fact, we did talk and talk and talk and talk when we went to the coffee of the week, didn't we? But I know you're a busy man. You've got clients to look after with their brand and their marketing. Dan, just finally, where can people find you, find Naked, and kind of connect with you?
Yeah, LinkedIn. I'm fairly available on LinkedIn, so
I like that. Fairly
available. Dan Bradfield on LinkedIn, and Naked. www.nakedmarketing.co.uk is where you'll find us and hear a little bit about us and our brand story and yeah, all that. And we have the socials as well, so check us out. Although I'm gonna check out our logo now on socials before I make your list, Chris.
Dan, thank you so much for your time today, mate. I really appreciate it.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for everyone that's listened, whether you're watching live or watching back. I've appreciated you partaking in this episode. If you've got any comments, questions, you want to challenge what's been said, drop them as a comment below, and either myself or Dan will be back to you. Thanks again for tuning into another episode of Coffee with Chris. Don't forget to donate to Big C, who help local people affected by cancer. Have a lovely day, and I'll see you all